Well, what is the way that ignorance superimposes, adds on, right? Exaggerates, brings out this exaggeration of Rangshin, Tibetan Rangshin, inherent existence, which translates the Tibetan Rangshin, Sanskrit Swabhava. So Swabhava can just mean nature, or when it's the object of negation, that's inherent existence. So the response, clearing away that qualm. Well, this is that well. In Tibetan, it's ona, ona. It's this, the where the mouth goes, ona, well. And we consistently translate it as well, but it would be nice to have an emoji of that does this well. Even if in general in the text of this master, okay, so now this is where it's pointed out that this word swabhava, or in Sanskrit nature, is swabhava Rangshin. This can mean, there's the conventional nature of things, so we can skip down there. Here, when we're talking about the object of negation, the mention of nature, which means inherent existence, and all these other words that mean inherent existence, it's not like that. The nature of hot pepper. What's the other word for hot pepper?
Germany.
Well, yeah, I guess that's just hot pepper. I guess I'm just because I know the Tibetan, I'm mixing up that there's some other word. Rather, the existence in objects, whether they be persons or other phenomena, of a mode of subsistence or a mode of abiding from their own side. As Ngawan Legden, he would get his hands up. What are the two sides? And he'd do this over and over and over again. The two sides are the subject side over here and the object side over there. He did this over and over and over again, so I got the point. The object from its own side, even if you're talking about a consciousness, you've got to get the two sides. There's the consciousness, wherever it is, and then another consciousness that's going to impute the consciousness. But he wouldn't get into those complexities. He'd make it simple so that a dumbass like myself could get the point. Of a mode of subsistence or a mode of abiding from their own side. You see, mode of subsistence from their own side. In those very phenomena themselves, without being posited and imputed through the force of an awareness, is a nature that is superimposed. It's added on. It's exaggerated. Superimposed. And that's where last time we brought up Ginanotra's thing about the arrow and adding something onto the arrow. Now we don't get involved with it's making it functional, but that's not the point here. You're adding something onto the stick. And this superimposition and apprehension of such as existing, whereas it doesn't exist, is the mode of superimposing a nature, whereas that nature does not exist. And that's how we get into all of this trouble. as Keizen Sambo, my one of three Nyingma Lamas, four. As he would say, he didn't identify the error. Oh, how terrible! Through a tiny error, such a huge mistake is made. And he would leave it up to me to figure out what the tiny error is. Such a mode of subsistence of these respective phenomena, of the, one by one, the conceived object apprehended by this awareness is hypothetically, why hypothetically? Because it doesn't exist. Identified as self. Well, identify it itself, it's hypothetical because it doesn't exist. You see, this is so carefully worded. And there's a comma after self. Or nature / inherent existence in this case. How confusing that the same word in English, nature, in Tibetan, Rangshin, in Sanskrit, Swabhava, is used for a conventional nature that does exist, and then for a nature that doesn't exist at all. Well, and also for the ultimate nature, which is emptiness. The ultimate nature of things, which is emptiness. As Chandrakirti says, I paused there, because I don't know if Nagarjuna says, oh yeah, sure he does, the chapter on nature, which is hellishly confusing. Because when he says nature, which nature is he talking about? The conventional nature of objects, the nature that's the object of negation, or the final nature of things, which is emptiness. When you read Tsongkhapa's commentary on that chapter, you think, oh, he's pulling my leg. He just chooses which of those three he wants in his system to make sense. Such motive, the conceiving. This accords with Chandrakirti's commentary on Arya Davis 400. So Karen Lang has, I don't know how much of Arya Davis 400 she's translated, and how much of Chandrakirti's commentary on it he's translated. She has translated. Karen is somebody who has Sanskrit, who has Tibetan, who has Chinese. So how marvelous these two lines are. All these things are not established under their own power because of being contingent on other conventions. The conventions are other than the thing, right? And conventions on other, contingent on other awarenesses. Since, how nice that we get a reason. They're not established under the, no, sorry. This is a new, since goes forward. Since they are not established under their own power, they do not have self. They do not have establishment by way of their own entity. So then Chandrakirti sums it up. Here in the world, that thing which is established by way of its own entity, exists by way of its own being, is established under its own power. It is not just established, it's not contingent on others. So at the end last time, if you got it, I listed I gave two Sanskrits, Pratibuddha and Adina. Adina. I'm giving tremendous emphasis. Adina. Adina. There's stress. There's not stress. Not bound to, connected to, subject to, entangled with. Adina, resting on, subject to, situated. Does not mean that things are not contingent on others. Does not mean that things are not contingent on causes and conditions producing them. Yeah, because things, impermanent things, are contingent on causes and conditions producing them. Rather, this is a case of calling subjects. This is hard for me to read because the book I'm currently working on, subjects means subject and predicate. So I go, when I read subjects. Here it means object possessors. Conventional consciousnesses, others. If things had such a nature, they would necessarily be established. Okay. They would necessarily be established. Now, notice the paragraph begins with contingent upon cause and conditions. Then it shifts to, if they had such a nature, of not being contingent on cause and conditions, they would be established without being posited through the force of those conventional consciousnesses. Causes and conditions shifts to being conventional consciousnesses in Chandrakirti's writing itself, and hence not contingent on others. I suggest you read through the whole of the rest of this chapter, most certainly.
May I ask one question?
Please.
Last week, I think it was around this area when we were explaining this section, and you mentioned that the superimposition is negative. How is that?
This is not
superimposing is a negative thing.
Yeah, superimposition is drondok in Tibetan, drondok, as opposed to dakpa. Dene dakpa. Superimposition is an exaggeration, whereas imputation doesn't have to be negative, doesn't have to be an exaggeration. Does that help?
I have to think about it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I shouldn't ask you right away. Does that help? Without being posited through the form, and hence not contingent on others. The word on needs to be put between contingent and others. That is, not posited through the force of others. If things had such a nature of being not contingent on causes and conditions, and not and which he somehow makes the jump. This gets back to an earlier question of Tuten Chodron's, of whether the first of the three dependent arisings is sufficient for understanding the most subtle type of emptiness, or right, the most subtle type of dependent arising. And I was pushing that it is, and we're beginning here an exposition of how it is. And you'd have to say how it is, if we're honest. It certainly looks like Chandrakirti makes an unjustified jump from dependent on contingent on causes and conditions to contingent on conventional consciousnesses, right? And thus, I just advised, since you have such a long time, you notice my humorous rendition of long between this meeting and the next, that you read, at least quickly, to see all that there is between this paragraph and the end of the chapter. Since it goes into the very problem, this is taken as a problem, that he makes this jump. And the rest of the chapter addresses this problem. So that's why I'm pushing that we look at this jump as unjustified. It's not, it's going to be explained how it's unjustified. It's the unjustified part of it is going to be tackled. And you'll want to come back at me and say, well, Ona, well then, what you said earlier is wrong. Then I'll say, well, you've just understood how I'm right. Therefore, such a nature is also called self-powered. You see, I'm not going to tend to explain something so highly complex, meaning I can't. But I did read ahead and see it's there. Therefore, it's there below. It is there below. Therefore, such a nature is also called self-powered, due to being established as an entity of objects that is its own respective uncommon mode of subsistence. Now you see, uncommon plays off of the autonomy school, where half of it is with the object and half of it is with the subject. Uncommon means it's all with the subject. As the late abbot, former abbot of Loseling, said, with the so-called lesser vehicle schools, it's all with the object. Now this is all, when you read about the less vehicle schools, all means relative to the mind-only school. Because so much of it, when you read Gelugpa presentations of the less vehicle schools, so much is with the subject on the subject side. But relative to the mind-only school, it's all with the object. With the mind-only school, it's half-half. Half-half. What? Because even though the object is due to the activation of a predisposition that's with the subject, the mind basis of all, for instance, with that portion of that of the Asanga wing that advocates the mind basis of all, something, a predisposition that's within the mind basis of all, that's activated, or within the other half of the mind-only school, that's with a subtle version of the mental consciousness, okay, both of them, then assert that there's a predisposition that's activated and produces an object, produces an appearance of the object and the subject. Both the object and the subject are established by way of their own character. So because both of those are established by way of their own character, it's said that there's an equality object-subject. So within there being no external world, it's a half-half. So it's all relative. It's relative to there being no external world, okay, and relative to that, and there being more concreteness in the so-called lesser vehicle schools. And I can't put that in a sentence. I'm at a loss right now with the lesser vehicle schools. Well, there is an external world. Okay. Shh. Then, relative to the consequent school, which is entirely on the subject side. Entirely. Because on the side of awareness, awareness being the term lo. Yeah, it's Kinso Yeshi Topten. Who's known for the depth of his ideas on great topics, as His Holiness said. Everything is imputed by awareness. What kind of awareness? Conceptual awareness. So with this kind of a layout, this is this great old man's summing up. Even though they posit an external world, it is imputed by conceptuality, which makes it more on the side of awareness than even the mind-only school. So, fits in what we're reading here, fits into that kind of presentation. And yet, as Geshe Wangyal said, nothing in the consequent school, nothing is, if I translate it literally, nothing is established on the object, like within the object, but everything that exists, he was speaking English, is objective. And he left it at that. He wasn't going to argue the point with me. You, in Tibetan, Yultengne Matru Gyang. I don't know how to translate objective. Maybe you'd have to say established by valid cognition, Tsemetru. Huh? What's your...
That sounds reasonable to me. Geshe Dorje Dando often uses language like this as well in English.
Yeah.
May you clarify, may I ask for one clarification in that previous paragraph that
Please.
I just didn't quite grasp when you were giving the explanation of the cancer from Jacob listening. But before that, like what launched into that was that sentence, therefore such a nature is also called self-powered due to being established as an entity of objects that is their own respective uncommon mode of subsistence. So this is the thing we're talking about that doesn't exist, right? The
Yes.
imputed, superimposed nature. But then
Yeah.
the uncommon mode of subsistence, uncommon refers to the subject only, you said? I follow.
Yes, that's a good point. Maybe the uncommon here is
Here it's different.
on the object side. Because it's the object having its own uncommon mode of subsistence. Good point. Thank you. Yeah. Because it's the object's own entity. Good way to end. Okay. Hope to see you in a couple of weeks.